I'm delighted we've got Stephen Green with us today. Stephen, you're a member of St Barnabas Church here in Kensington, but you've also got other hats in your free time, as it were. You are chairman at the moment of the Natural History Museum in London.
I am.
And you're also chair of the church, let me get this right, the Archbishop of Canterbury's Anglican Communion Fund.
That's correct, yeah.
So, and I think you do lots of other stuff, so you probably don't have a lot of time to relax at the moment, do you?
I keep myself agreeably busy, put it that way.
It's really good to be able to have a little conversation with you, Stephen, particularly focusing in on the Anglican Communion dimension. The Church of England is part of a much wider family of churches, and we're just coming out of the Pentecost season where we remember how the Spirit was poured out on all nations, and we're part of a worldwide church. Would you like to just give us, paint a portrait, as it were, in a few words? What on earth is the Anglican Communion?
Well, the Anglican Communion is the communion of churches that are, broadly speaking, Anglican, like the Church of England. It's a very diverse group. It's spread across 180-some countries.
Oh, right.
And there are probably about 90 million Anglicans worldwide, so if you compare that with the Catholic Church, it's very small. If you compare it with the Baptist movement, it's quite small. But nonetheless, it's not 90 million is still a big number and growing. The important thing about the Anglican Communion, and I think for us to focus on, is that its centre of gravity is not in England. It's in Africa. The average Anglican is about 30 years old, and she is African.
Fantastic. So there's a diversity built in there that's actually hidden behind that name, because you imagine, because of the history and things, it to be a very sort of English-dominated thing, but actually today...
It arose out of the whole British colonial imperial experience, of course, and to this day, the bulk of Anglicans are citizens of Commonwealth countries, though not all by any means, and in particular in Latin America, an area of the world which is struggling so badly with COVID-19 at the moment. There's sizable Anglican communities in Argentina, in Brazil and elsewhere.
So diversity marks the Anglican.
Huge diversity.
So what holds it together?
Well, that's a good question, because there isn't a sort of strong central hierarchical structure with any figure like the Pope in the case of the Catholics at the top of it all. The Archbishop of Canterbury has a sort of leading role, but has no formal authority within the Anglican Communion. It's made up of about 40 so-called provinces. A province will have an archbishop at its head, and in this case in England we have two provinces, one Canterbury and one York, and there are about 40, up to 40 other ones around the world. There's a loose structure. There is a so-called consultative council of the Anglican Communion, of which the Archbishop of Hong Kong is currently the president. So it's not like the Catholic Church. It's quite loose and diverse, and you find all sorts of opinions. And one of the, I think, sad things about the Anglican Communion is that when it gets itself in the news, it's all too often because there's high-level argy-bargy going on about issues to do with, frankly, sexuality. And you have very liberal perspectives coming out of particularly America and Canada, and much more conservative perspectives coming out of some parts of Africa. And that argument has all too readily kind of seized the headlines. The truth about the Anglican Communion is that these 90 million people in all sorts of different environments are working away at building the kingdom of God, and often the most incredibly difficult places on the planet. I'd love to give you a couple of examples of that, if I may. First of all, the South Sudan is a newish country. It broke away from the Sudan not many years ago. Its entire history, ever since it became independent, has been of civil war. Yet the Anglican Church is probably the only functioning institution that kind of holds people together in that country. And the work, when you listen to bishops from the South Sudan, and there is in fact one of them are currently in the job of international relationships with the Communion in Lambeth Palace, and he's a remarkable man, and he's seen unbelievable things that you and I would never want to have to see. And there they are, working away on a daily basis, running churches, but also schools and hospitals, and holding a society together in the most unbelievably difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
I think too of Eastern Congo. For reasons lost in history, the east of the Congo is largely Anglican. Now, mostly the Congo is a Catholic Christian country, but the east of the Congo happens to have a strong Anglican presence for historical reasons. And there you get parish priests, lay workers, people from the Mothers' Union doing extraordinary work, and again in a country, A, which is one of the poorest on the planet, and B, has been racked by civil war for donkey's years now. So we in prosperous Kensington go to church every Sunday, and we work to make sure that we're challenged by the faith that we proclaim. They are people who live this in all its force in some of the most difficult and uncomfortable countries in the world. I think too of Pakistan, another country where there's a small Anglican presence. It is in fact a more integrated presence with the Methodists and so on, but nonetheless there are bishops, Anglican bishops in Pakistan. And that's a country where you can go to church Sunday after Sunday, never being quite sure that somebody won't turn up at the back of the church with a gun or a bomb.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking of this. There are situations where there's persecution, considerable persecution.
So the Anglican Communion is our brothers and sisters around the world, living their lives in all sorts of different conditions, but some of them are the hardest and most difficult and most dangerous on the planet.
I love, we said at the beginning, we're in this Pentecost season, and one of the things that characterises that early church, alongside its diversity, is the koinonia, the community feel and the fellowship that they experienced. And I love the idea that actually we can experience koinonia, fellowship, beyond just the local church, but actually we can genuinely be in partnership with Christians across the world who are maybe going through similar things. Is there a sense at the moment, in the context of the coronavirus, where there's almost a sort of common challenge that everybody's facing, are there ways in which other churches are having to face that in particularly sort of difficult situations? We hear that in Africa it's just beginning to grow, whereas in Europe it seems the peak seems to have passed. South America as well. How's the church dealing with that?
Well, struggling to deal with it. And working together, I think, well. I think in the case of the communion, there's an initiative that I'd love to talk about in a second, that is raising support for COVID-19 related programs. And you've got all stages of the process, as you said. Europe appears to be past its peak, America not clearly past its peak, and South America definitely not past its peak. Africa may still have this in store, relatively low levels of cases, except in South Africa, where it does seem to be spreading quite rapidly. And one thing is for sure is that if a country that's very poor, and very rural, will find it difficult to cope with even the basics of COVID-19 protection. For instance, we talk about washing hands in fresh water. Well, they don't have the fresh water.
Right.
So it can be very basic stuff. And if you also imagine, dioceses in this country are finding it financially very difficult because their income has dropped drastically. Well, imagine what it's like in some of those kinds of environments that I've described, where the clergy suddenly find they've got no income.
Yeah.
Literally no income. And there are no question of government furlough schemes or support or anything like that. So this is hard stuff.
How into that context is the Anglican Communion Fund sort of channeling interest and focusing and beginning to sort of, as it were, shine a light on some of those situations?
Well, I do think the Anglican Communion Fund is uniquely positioned to raise support and channel funds, because it knows it has diverse links widely through the communion. It knows the relationships on the ground. So I think it's able to marshal funds and provide meaningful support. And we have actually just this last week, had a meeting of the fund where we looked at some emergency programs in a whole number of different countries. I think of Tanzania, of the Congo, of Brazil, of Pakistan, of Jordan. I could go, just a whole range of different countries at different stages in the process of dealing with COVID, and differently able. Some poorer, some less poor, some organised, some disorganised, some in the midst of civil conflict, and we've been able to identify projects that will be meaningful support as they tackle COVID-19 in their communities. And then on the other side, I'm pleased to report that we've seen a bit of an upsurge in financial support for the fund. We've had some generous support from one or two particular churches in America. Normally, we raise about £500,000, between £500,000 and £600,000 a year. I think we will do at least 10-20% more than that this year, and I'm excited by that because that means the church is responding collectively to the needs of these communities where the Anglican Church is, to repeat, often the only functioning institution in the society.
What I love particularly about the fund, if I've understood it correctly, is that it's in the title, the Archbishop of Canterbury's Anglican Communion Fund. That's not just a title, is it? He's really involved.
He's really involved.
And it's channeled to specific things that he's discerning.
Correct.
Coming out of his travels and his sort of big picture view of what's going on.
Absolutely. And standing back from COVID-19 for a moment, it is true of this Archbishop in particular that he's made the communion a really important part of his ministry. When he took office, 2012, I think it was, 2013, can't quite remember when now, he spent the first 18 months of his period in office not going around the Church of England, but actually going around the communion. He made it his business to visit with his wife Caroline every single province of the communion. So they spent 18, and not just to sort of breeze in and out, but spend good time in each one with the Archbishop of that particular province, with bishops, meeting lay folk and Mothers Union workers and I remember him towards the end of that process. He was exhausted, coming back from his knees, and he'd got one province to go, and this was just before Christmas. And he had one province to go, and that province was Scotland. So he went up to Scotland, exhausted, just before Christmas. It was very cold, and he got pneumonia. And of course recovered. But all that's by way of saying this is an Archbishop who cares about our brothers and sisters around the communion, who believes passionately that the communion is an extraordinary force for the common good in the world at large, and a way of living out the Christian gospel in all sorts and conditions. So yes, this is the Church of all nations.
Amazing. You've given us it's like opening the curtains and the window and getting some fresh air in from outside. You've really helped us, I think, see that bigger picture, Stephen. Thank you. If we want to know more, the easiest thing is to go onto the Lambeth Palace website.
The Lambeth Palace website will tell you, I think, all you need to know, or get in touch with me. I'd be very happy to tell anybody anything about it. I think the Anglican Communion is the great unsung story of the Christian presence in so many countries in the world.
Praise God. It's amazing. Well, thank you. You've really fueled our interest, and we're going to channel that now into a moment of prayer. But thank you so much for taking the time out to share with us, Stephen. It's been a delight.